All right. Hey, Liz, I am so excited to invite you here to the Unlock the Sugar Shackles podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. This feels familiar. This feels nice.
Yeah. So I love to start out with my guest stories and, what is coming up for you in terms of what you feel really passionate about lately. And I know you have some programs coming out, so I'd love to hear a little bit about your story.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, it's raining here and I already had my internet like pause and freeze like as you were speaking. So I apologize.
It's all good. It'll come through.
It'll come through. Okay, well, my story is a long and winding story. Just kidding, it's not so bad. I started in the nutrition and fitness world probably in 2010, maybe a little before that, and I was all paleo, all CrossFit all the time. And I think we all maybe remember that stage of life, but it was great because it really did, not only did it you bring an awareness that function is just as important as aesthetics. And I hesitate to even use the word aesthetics, but I just remember losing that focus that I had for so many decades before that on how I looked and really focusing more on how I felt, how I could move, what I was capable of in the gym, and how I could fuel that. So it was all CrossFit paleo stuff, but it really turned into at least, a longer than a decade now focus on what food can do for us and what appropriate, thoughtful fitness can do for us. And it turns out it can do a lot of really, really amazing things. And one of the things I'm really grateful for is that across the last decade, when I've worked in as a nutritional therapy practitioner, working with athletes, working with everyday folks who just want to feel better, podcasting, talking about this stuff on the internet, I feel like I have really opted out of that rat race that is conventional nutrition and fitness. That's still all about calories. It's still all about how you look or how you measure up to some image that you see of some celebrity or somebody whose literal job it is to look a certain way. So I've almost forgotten a little bit about all that stuff. It's just not as relevant to me anymore as it was 15, 20 years ago when I was, in my 20s. And so I feel really, really fortunate and really grateful for that because it has enabled me to dig into topics around food, lifestyle, diet, wellness, and even all the way out, you use the word spokes, like blood sugar and glucose control, having these spokes, these different aspects to them. Well, it's the same thing as overall wellness. Like I ended up talking about fertility and family. I ended up talking about clean beauty, all of these different things that can be really delightful ways to incorporate that sort of enhanced awareness around true wellness into just your overall, scheme. So, man, the story changes every time I tell it because it's been so long that I've been doing this stuff. So I should probably also point out that I published a book called Eat the Yolks in 2013,
I have it right
which
there.
was a highlight of my life for sure.
Yeah, so I love this conversation already because I think that there's a lot of voices out there and just our society telling us that, here's this model, like, and just sort of hinting like we need to look like this person. And there's so much more that goes beyond that. And I think it's okay to want your body to look a certain way. But at the same time, also bringing it back to function and wellness, right? So I think that's really where the conversation is going to focus. That yes, body composition is important not only for aesthetics but also for an important reason. Like muscles are very important, and we can go into that, but the function. So if you're just like in the gym just like busting out bicep curls, like how actually functional is that? Like how often are we picking something up in this motion? Is that what you're meaning when you say that?
Well, no, but like that is kind of yes and no. But I'm thinking about like now the bicep curl and like the tricep extensions that people used or people still do. I actually really like what you just said, and I want to call it out. There's nothing wrong with wanting your body to look a certain way. I think there's nothing inherently wrong with it. It is the attitude you bring to that quest that determines whether or not you're going to survive it with your mental health intact, right? So, one of the
Mm-hmm.
things I learned that was really interesting in developing this fitness and nutrition program that I have is I was working with it just happened to be that my trainer and his wife He is a former college athlete. She is a former college athlete. Just all around, just, can I curse on this podcast?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. All around just badass people. Just they've got their priorities straight. They are so dialed in, and their personality types, they're very different from mine, but we work well together. But one of the things I learned from Brittany, who is, like I said, former college athlete, Pilates instructor, and likes a certain look, like she has done figure competitions in the past, is that you can actually approach these things with curiosity and interest and a lack of attachment if it doesn't turn out the way you want it to. And I think that's the key. I feel like right now the social current is toward you should never think about how you look. You shouldn't care. And I certainly have been a mouthpiece for that in some ways. I mean, I can't count the number of times I told people, if you're worried about that last 5 pounds, maybe your problem is that you're worried about that last 5 pounds versus like those last 5 pounds actually being a problem. Like to pull people's focus away from that obsessive need to lose whatever, 5, 10, 15 pounds, whatever it is. But getting to know Britt and becoming better friends with her and growing our work relationship together, I realized that it's all about the mindset that you bring to something like that. And if you're looking at overall health first, like you said, like you might be able to do this, but what is it actually doing for you? Like it's not an efficient way to promote health or longevity on any level. It's just doing bicep curls all day. So if we can bring that curiosity and that interest to anything, whether it's improving our overall health or changing our body composition, I think that guarantees us better outcomes, whether or not the actual the physiological, what you see in the mirror actually changes.
Yeah, that's so well said. And that attitude of curiosity is something that I use in my coaching programs to sort of help people disarm that perfectionism. And I am an Enneagram type 1 total recovering perfectionist, so I know a thing or two about it and I could spot it real easily.
Yeah.
But I think that we can have this, like, also in our society, just feeling like everything needs to come really quickly. And so we lack that patience. And so it's like, I have to do this and I have to do it perfectly. And if I'm not getting results, it must mean I'm not doing it perfectly. Instead of that like angsty energy behind that and that need to get it right, what you're suggesting is saying like, what is this trying to teach me? Where is the lesson in this? Why do I keep self-sabotaging? Why did I plan to go to this restaurant and not eat anything with sugar in it, yet I was the one ordering dessert? Like, just getting curious about this stuff is super, super helpful.
Can I say something about self-sabotage quickly?
Please do. Yeah.
It's such an interesting term, and this is something I've actually been thinking about a bit lately. Our podcast, when you came on Balanced Bites, I did this whole intro, and I ended up on this whole rant just out of nowhere.
It was so good.
It was so good.
It was so good.
I do say so myself. I thought it was pretty good. This idea that, and I don't mean this in a victim mentality way. I mean this in a acknowledging reality way. This is a line from Michael Scott. I can't help it.
I'm a huge Office fan. Please,
okay.
Let it happen.
You women are up against it. Like, I think about that all the time. I think that's from the episode where Michael Scott takes all the women in the office to the mall.
Women's appreciation. Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's like, yeah. Is it pap smear? Is it pap smear? Is it schmear?
So good.
One of my favorites. But I do feel like it's important to acknowledge that we are up against a lot. And oftentimes what feels like self-sabotage is kind of we shouldn't be surprised that it's hard. Like we can do our utmost best to stack the deck in a way that is gonna make things work for us. But big food is on every corner. It's on every shelf. It makes its way into our house because you have kids, you need some snacks around, whatever it is. We're up against something that is massive and a behemoth and is really, really difficult. It's everywhere. And I've also talked in another podcast about this idea of willpower and how willpower is sort of I'm trying to make the argument that willpower is sort of the opposite of what we think it is. We want to use willpower to enable us to stand firm against all of these really powerful influences that literally speak to our like primordial physiology, that is to seek energy at any cost and to not lose our reserves if we possibly can avoid it. So in thinking about this, it's like willpower is actually this amazing force within our bodies that wants to keep us alive and stable and functioning for as long as we need to be alive, stable, and functioning. And that is why when we try and stop doing something, whether that's eating too much sugar or, whatever behaviors that we're engaging in that are actually working against us, when we're doing that, we actually sort of need to thank our bodies and say, like, thank you for driving me toward survival at every turn. And hopefully we can sort of use that awareness as a way to flip the script and say, yes, thank you. I realize what I'm up against here, and I'm going to prepare for it. And I'm going to put on my armor and be ready for that with all of the tools that I possibly can use. And you've talked about tools. You talked about tools on the Balance Bites podcast. So long and winding way of saying willpower kind of might feel like it's working against us sometimes, but in fact, it's actually really trying to help us survive. And in looking and acknowledging the fact that we have all of these influences around us that are speaking to our deepest, most ingrained physiology, we can sort of be a little softer with ourselves and then also hopefully strategize a little more effectively.
So well said. So I have chills because we are like, and just like you said, I was like, why is she talking about being a victim? And it's not like we want to sit in this victim role, but we want to, let's call a spade and let's call out what is actually happening. This is like a David versus Goliath, like even bigger than that situation where everything in society is set up to have you not be well, honestly. So just like you could go to Home Depot and you're trying to buy like a planter and a piece of wood, and it's like there's Skittles and M&Ms and Butterfinger. It's like, why is this here? So every single store you go into, every place you go, every billboard, all the advertising, and even thinking about how many things that you pass on the road, especially if you live in a city. I remember when I was living in New York City, it's just like constant bombardment everywhere. And just how many times you have to say no in a day, right? So it's like you're seeing all these messages, you're hearing commercials. Like I listen to a podcast, like the Office Ladies podcast, and they're advertising McDonald's. And I'm just like, okay, there's another one. Like, it's just, you're constantly, it's everywhere. And so realizing that this undertaking and everyone else out there, like as soon as you start setting these new boundaries and undertaking this wellness journey and deciding that you're not going to eat gluten, or you're going to, mostly eat whole real foods, that it seems like it shouldn't be that big of a deal. And then you go out into the wilderness and you go to a food desert, you travel, and you realize, oh my goodness, it is actually difficult. I have to go so far out of my way to maintain this. But it, like, knowing that it's not going to be just as easy as like, oh, it's going to be just the same as like I could go to the corner and go to 7-Eleven and grab something. It's not like that. It's like I have to find a good store, and I mean there's so much privilege that comes with this, and access to good food. So that's part of this conversation too. But it is difficult, and it's not to say that it can't be done, but knowing that and just being prepared with like, okay, I'm going to have to go out of my way to make all these shifts to protect myself. And again, these are like boundaries, because boundaries are there to protect you. And so what you're saying yes to, and then also what you're sort of then agreeing to take on as like, oh, I have to prepare all these foods before we leave on my trip, and I have to like scope out where is there going to be like a Whole Foods or a Sprouts or something when I travel. So there's all these added pieces to make this happen, and you don't necessarily realize it. And then you were talking about like the beauty products, like, you start switching with your food, and then you're like, oh my gosh, what is in my lipstick, and you start getting really curious there. So yes. Such great points.
Well, it's hard by design, and I feel like nothing good has ever come to me when I'm trying to deny reality and to bury my head in the sand. And sometimes it's useful to get mad, just to get ticked off that this entire consumer culture is built around appealing to our, I don't want to say basest instincts because they're survival instincts, but like get a little bit mad. Like we have the right to be like, I am being manipulated intentionally. This food company, every food company has entire wings of their businesses devoted to getting scientists to create food that makes you want to eat more of it more often. And even Whole Foods is hard. Like they have, yesterday I went and I got my Justin's white chocolate peanut butter cup, and that's not a bad thing, but it's not like you're walking in and it's like vegetables, meat, it's not, there are a lot of options at Whole Foods that are appealing to those same instincts. And we don't want to remove all the enjoyment from eating. There are things that taste really good that might not have positive impacts on our physiology, and that's cool. But if we feel empowered in making those choices and we feel like we can own those choices and we have some agency, that's kind of where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah. That's a really important point too. I mean, I'm just like nodding my head profusely over here, just like agreeing with everything you're saying that, yeah, the anger piece, that is, I think, when I realized, like through my own health journey, when I first got Rob Wolfe's book, the Paleo Diet Solution, my first emotion, I think, was rage. And I'm not a person who gets angry. I'm like, I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed, or like, I just get resentful. I just shove it down, right? So I don't identify a lot with like the feeling of anger. And I felt rage because I was so sick and in and out of doctor's offices, spending all this money, pricking myself 5 times a day, with 5 shots, like all these allergy medications, feeling like garbage. My head didn't work. I was so tired. And I'm like, I was lied to. Like we are being lied to, and we are being manipulated and marketed to. And like
now
I was just following the food pyramid. What were you saying?
I mean, this goes back to like the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Like this is decades, and it's one iteration after the other of how can we sell more stuff to these people who are just trying to be well.
Yeah. And it made me so upset because like even my mom's like, I'm so sorry I fed you that way. Like I thought I was doing the right thing. I'm like, exactly. That's the exact point. You thought you were doing the right thing. You were doing what you were told. So we have to also take ourselves off the hook, but also realize it's our responsibility to learn and to fix it and to develop that agency over things so our sugar dragons aren't running the show, because it's so easy to fall back into that where our blood sugar is dysregulated, where these foods are sort of sneaking in. And I hear it from people all the time, and I experience it myself. They say, oh, the sugar kind of snuck back in. And it happens like that, right? It's like it's one Justin's peanut butter cup, and then, oh, well, let me just have this other one, and let me finish off my kids' snacks, or, oh, like, we should go out for ice. And then it's like, oh, I had sugar every single day this week. So then it's, and just also realizing that's going to happen, right? That's going to happen.
Okay.
That's okay.
That happened.
Right. We catch it, and then we could be like, oh, let's get curious and let's move on, right? Like, oh, I saw what happened. This came in, the kids' snacks and whatever, and I saw that pattern. Like, okay, tomorrow let's start fresh, right? We don't have to wait till Monday, but it's like we're gonna quote unquote fall off the horse. It's about getting on the horse faster and faster every time, and also, like, if you fall off a horse, you're not going to be like, you're such an idiot, why did you fall off the horse? Like, be like, are you okay? Like, it's okay, we all make mistakes, like loving ourselves through this process and realizing, again, it's not going to look perfect.
And trusting that you're going to get better at it. I mean, I coach second grade soccer, and we had a couple of really amazing games, and I was like, they got it, they finally got it, and then we lost like 2-10. And it's like, it's okay. Like we practiced yesterday, we're going to have more games, and it's going to be that process. That is life. It's from the beginning of life to the end of life, where you are engaged in a process of self-discovery and reacting and engaging with your environment, which is also ever-changing. Your relationships are ever-changing. And to be able to view that as a process rather than this on the wagon, off the wagon, like, got to do better, got to make this monumental declaration that it's going to be different starting on Monday. Rather than that, just getting curious about it and learning and having faith that over time with practice, you're going to get better at this stuff.
Yeah, that is so important to, and it's making me think about a conversation that we had offline about how we talk about that the nuance is really where, health lies in the nuances. And it's not like, just swear off all vegetables and then you're going to be healthy. Like it's not this, like you said, this big declaration and I have to do everything the same. You talked about this ever changing. We live on an ever changing planet in an ever changing body, and we're cyclical. And our earth has seasons and it has different times of day. And so things are always changing too. And I think that people are always, I don't know if it comes from mainstream medicine where we were sick when we were a kid, we got one medicine and we got better. Like that one thing that will fix it, right? And so I think that we still keep that same mindset of like, oh, this one thing is going to help fix my PCOS. It's never going to be one thing, because one thing didn't get you there unless it was one bacteria, right, that you kill with one antibiotic. Like that's really the one of the only things that just the one thing. So we have to take into account that there's a lot of different areas. So coming back to those spokes, like we have to work on our food, we have to work on our movement, we have to work on our relationships and our circadian rhythms, going outside in nature, and stress reduction. Like all these spokes, our sleep, like all of those are what go into creating optimal wellness. And surprisingly or not surprisingly, like blood sugar is also one of those things. It could be the center with all those spokes, or it could be one of the pieces on the outside as well, because we need to get our blood sugar right, but we need a lot of things to be right in order to get our blood sugar right. I'm going everywhere, but
No, well, it's interesting because blood sugar does make an appearance in so many. I mean, it makes its appearance in the circadian rhythm management. It makes its appearance in what kind of muscle mass we have and whether we're maintaining it over the years and the type of movement that we do. There are so many places that it hits on that it actually does start to feel like it's sort of the epicenter of at least like a good chunk of the story.
Yeah, absolutely. So, P.S., if you guys were like intrigued with this conversation about how we were lied to and all these things, like Liz's book, Eat the Yolks, I just need to plug your book because it talks about all that and so much more. It goes into where all this messaging came from. And do you want to talk a little bit more about that before we move on to talking about muscles?
Yeah, definitely. So I wrote Eat the Yolks in like I think it was published in 2014 actually, and I divided it up. Basically, I was getting asked the same question over and over, like, what about cholesterol or what about fat? Like, and now I think people have a little bit more of an awareness around fat and cholesterol. But I'd be asked about protein and doesn't it cause cancer? And I would be asked about shouldn't we avoid the sun because, and people were so confused. And so I broke it up into chapters that specifically addressed fat, protein, carbohydrate, which still carbohydrate is still a huge source of confusion for people, nutrients, and I really actually think I did a pretty good job, and I think it has stood the test of time. I mean, some of the pop culture
100%.
references in it are just way dated and are stupid, but I think I really brought it to really a lot of that book was me sorting through all of these things for myself and accumulating not just the scientific evidence that I think many of us really need to feel confident in what we're doing, but also like the how we got here. That was what was really compelling for me. So it's not just like, well, why do we must believe that cholesterol is bad because this study and this study. Well, no, actually, let's go all the way back to the 50s and 60s and look at what kind of research was being funded by whom and why, like what the sugar lobby was actually funding. The history, one of the most compelling parts of it, I think, was the history of the Kellogg Food Company and how.
Yeah, can you talk about this in detail?
I don't even remember anymore. I think I have my Kellogg book here somewhere. Oh, here it is. Vegetarian America. It was a very, very interesting book. And learning how, God, was it John Kellogg, I think is his name. Now I don't even remember. This was almost a decade ago. How like the Kellogg company and his values as an individual were really centered around stopping people from having sexual urges.
Yep.
And that eating certain foods would accomplish that. So getting rid of like the spices, getting rid of the animal protein, and that type of stuff sort of caught on and snowballed. And we can map that out, and understanding the sort of janky, fraudulent way we got to certain conclusions for me is a little bit more powerful, because they are also like the underpinnings of the scientific research that gets done. So it's almost like a lot of this research that has been pointed to over the years was done under like basically false pretenses. So I talk about that. I talk about the China study and how it's not actually a study. It's a book by someone who's talking about another study and misinterpreting it also, by the way, and talking about the sun and how important it is to not just generating vitamin D in our bodies, but also likely other photo products that are really beneficial to our health. So I go through all of that, and I think it has really stood the test of time.
Yeah, it definitely has, because I know it's in that book and I know we're still having these conversations. And, we can be having this conversation like, oh, that, like, it just feels like we sometimes have tinfoil hats on. And it's like, no, just, this is written down. This is actual fact, and we can trace this, and we can trace the money and the big interests of, big pharma, big food. And then, like you said, all this scientific research has been done, and they point to these previous studies as like part of their evidence, and that's a bad study. It's based on correlation or these food recall surveys. I just saw a meme the other day. This is random, but it was like someone was pretending to be their memory, and she's like, hey, I have a question, and the memory was like, sure, do you want old lyrics from 1992 from this hip hop song, or do you want like my second grade best friend's phone number? And she's like, no, can you tell me what I ate for dinner 2 nights ago? She's like, I don't know. And like, it was just funny that it's like, yeah, these food recall studies are what so many studies are based on. Like, oh, this gives you an increased risk of this. Like, animal protein is bad for you because this. And they just do it versus from these food recall studies. Like, can you remember what you had for dinner 2 nights ago? What about like last Thursday, like 2 Thursdays ago? Like, no, you don't remember. No. So it's just so much of the research is so bad. So I love your book, and it does stand the test of time, and I really, really recommend it if you're wondering like all these questions and then you still have these doubts left over. I remember we used to call it conventional wisdom, saying that like saturated fat is bad, cholesterol is bad. Like if you're still, maybe if you're newer to this, or if you're still like, well, is my cholesterol, because my cholesterol's a little high, my doctor wants me to get a statin, like what should I do? Like, this is a really great resource to understand why your doctor, who is, scary and an authoritative figure in a white coat, why are they telling you this? And it's not just like us out here, like crunchy granola people, well, grain-free granola people, like telling you this for no reason, but there's actual, there's an actual documented reason. It's not just because we want to be anti whatever that is. So, yeah. Yeah, awesome. So let's talk a little bit. I know you have a program coming out for healthy moms, Fit Mom, it's called.
Yeah, okay. So the program we decided to call it Athletic Mom, which
nice.
People feel very strongly about the name, but I like it because it was so interesting. I felt like the universe really aligned, and I've always done things that coincide with the stage of life that I'm in. That's just how things work for me. That's where I get the most passionate about things.
Yeah, I get
where
it.
I can really pour into them. Yeah. So this was a couple of years ago where I was like hearing over and over from people like, I just want to feel like an athlete again. Like, I just want to feel athletic. I don't care. I don't want to be a bodybuilder. I don't want to go to the gym and just plod away for like who knows what reason. You show up and you're like, I'm supposed to, am I trying to look better? Am I trying to feel better? But how am I going to get from point A to point Z? And just that feeling of like, I know I should be doing this for myself, but like, why? But how much energy am I wasting? How much time am I wasting? That type of thing. And I was just hearing from people of all ages, people my age, people younger who were having babies, just getting married, just getting out of their 20s, And then my mother-in-law even said, I just want to feel athletic. And it's just that feeling. I think we look at athletes and feeling athletic as feeling capable and feeling like badasses. Like that's just the long and short of it. And life can kind of beat us down. Like we can feel like we've failed a ton of times at eating healthfully, or you've yelled at your children too many times in the last couple of months. Like there are so many things that we can feel like we have failed at. And I think physicality and how your body works and functions is another one of those crux things, like blood sugar, where it's like, if you feel good and you feel capable, you can conquer the world. Like, it underlies almost everything else. And I also think it gives you more strength of will is like the opposite of the phrase I want to use, but it's the only one I can come up with right now. When you feel like you are owning life and you are doing the thing, you're making better choices everywhere else too. You feel like you've got more of a patience runway. You have better decision-making power in your day-to-day with regards to the food you're eating, when you're going to bed, all of that. So the power of movement and incorporating really smart, physically demanding movement into your routine is like unmatched as far as the power it has to have a ripple effect in your life. But the problem is when you're 30s and 40s and 50s and beyond, you have so many things that are going on. Many people have kids. Many people are taking care of aging parents. People have jobs. They have siblings that they're worried about. They have worries. They have a to-do list that's a mile long. And the fact is that moving your body, it ends up having to kind of fall by the wayside. And then when you try and incorporate some kind of movement, there's always that worry that either I don't know what I'm doing and I'm just going to, spin my wheels and nothing's going to happen, or I'm going to be wasting time. And that was my big thing. I was like, I need to not be wasting any time. I need to do this, but I need to know that what I'm doing is going to get me to this place, and I'm going to feel like an athlete again. I'm going to feel like I can jump, run, push, pull, lunge, pick up kids, coach soccer without tweaking a hammy, all of that stuff. Like, not just being fit for myself and longevity, but being fit for everyday life. And I don't know if that sounds boring. I probably need to reformulate my pitch. But at a certain point, you start to experience that. Like, I was coaching soccer and I was like, I'll break into a sprint and I'll sprint with the girls. And I was like, oh, my hammy. So that wasn't a good moment. And I realized I have to maintain this baseline, or aging is going to be a lot more difficult than it has to be. So it doesn't matter if you're 30 or 40 or 20 or 75, I don't care. We created this program to give you maximum results with minimum time investment and equipment, and we built it to cross multiple phases of training. So mobility, flexibility, agility, balance, all of these things that create a healthy baseline for the next 20 to 50 years of your life. So I forgot the original question, but I'm very passionate about
it's great. So I am hearing this. I love the pitch because I can relate to it so much. So I'm 37 now, and the pandemic actually really slowed me down. And I was doing a ton of acro yoga before then. I felt very much like an athlete. I was also lifting. I was getting a lot of injuries because I was getting thrown in the air. But I did feel like an athlete back then. And I used to say I loved feeling strong, especially it felt very empowering to have a strong upper body, which when I met my wife, that's when I started really working out my upper body. She was always very strong came from a farm girl from the, the Midwest, and super strong upper body. And it felt really empowering to be able to pick stuff up and have defined arms. And I was like, wow, this is different. Like, I felt what you're talking about, that feeling of like when you feel this physical strength, you get this other type of inner strength. And it also breeds this discipline because you have to keep it up, so you have to keep going. And so it's sort of self-perpetuating, but it was also really fun. And so it was into my routine. There was a lot of fun, and so I didn't want to not do it. And so that felt really good for me. So then the pandemic happened, and acro really stopped because you have to touch people. And then I was getting injured. And then the person who is most likely to get injured is an athlete who has taken a break, because they maintain a lot of their strength and they have the knowledge of how to do certain things, and they go back to trying to do what they did, but their joints can't keep up. And so they're very likely to develop injuries, and I fall into that category. And also, I go way hard. I'm like, I can just do this. I'll get back into it. And I try to push myself and get injured. And then you get injured, and then you take more time off, and then the injuries almost beget more injuries. And so now I'm doing mobility with a trainer, and I'm feeling like all I'm doing the 2 times a week I go is making up for all the sitting that I do all
Mm-hmm.
week. And it doesn't feel good. And I'm wanting to get out of this rut of like feeling like I'm just doing this almost like the bare minimum to keep my body pain free. And it's amazing because if I don't do it, my body starts breaking down. I'm in pain. I want to go to the chiropractor. Like I don't feel well. And so it's great to see how it improves my body, but also like I just want to go further and feel like I could, jump back into acro and not feel like I'm going to get injured, like I got too old that I'm going to break. And I can feel the difference between how I felt at 32 and how I feel at 37. It's like the age is getting, like it goes exponentially up.
Yes.
And I'm like, I have friends who are in acro who are 50, and I was like, wow, they must really be in good shape. So it just makes it like every year you're like, wow, I really need to keep doing this before, like, you can't take time off. You have to like build it in and keep it consistent, or else I feel like you're up Schitt's Creek without a paddle. Kind of thing.
It's true. And like, that was the type of information that I would really resist. I just didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to think about like, oh, you stop and then you're more prone to injury. Like, but if we're dealing in reality and we're being pragmatic, which I think is important because you can waste a lot of time in denial. And I hate wasting time. Actually, I like wasting time, but not on this. This is not the thing I want to waste time on. Age-related sarcopenia, which is like basically muscle loss as you age, can start as early as like 40 years old. And I'm 40 in a couple of months. I know, it's wild. And so this is the time. This is the time. And to go back to what you do with blood sugar and helping folks with blood sugar, it's like muscle, skeletal muscle is like the organ of blood sugar control. It's like your number one hedge against blood sugar issues other than diet. And there are times actually when movement, and in particular the muscle that the proper types of movement build, can actually really give you some buffer against eating something pretty crappy or eating something pretty crappy for a couple of days or a couple of weeks in a row. So you have all of this potential all within your lean muscle mass, and it's pretty extraordinary. But like, this is the time, because once it's gone, once it starts declining, which can be, like I said, as early as like 40 years old, it is that much harder to build. So it's like you want to start with a really good foundation, and you want to pay attention to that, because you can also, when you're injured, you can lose muscle mass really, really quickly. So, and again, another thing you said was like, you want to go right back in there and do the things that you were able to do 2 weeks, 2 years ago, and it just doesn't work like that. So you really do have to rebuild a foundation consistently, and also sort of, I don't know if the word would be periodize, but have phases of training in the same way you have phases of your nutrition journey. One of the things that you said on the pod when you came on the Balance Bites podcast was like, keto is a tool. Like, you were talking about all the different tools nutritionally that we have in our toolbox, and that really stuck with me. And thinking about the fact that we don't want to use one tool forever. We don't want to only use, you said, I think, a hammer. We want to use all the tools in the toolbox. And training is the same way. You can train flexibility, agility, mobility, balance, and strength, all of those things somewhat at the same time, but there is a optimal order of doing those things, and then phasing your training into specific types of strength training. For some people, hypertrophy is going to be more important. For other people, it's going to be like really just strength, central nervous system oriented stuff, muscle building stuff. And to have that knowledge and to be able to apply it is going to have far, far reaching benefits. I mean, beyond just like feeling like a badass again, which is really why I wanted to do it all in the first place.
That's so good, and I'm so intrigued because I am unfamiliar with this order. So can you walk us through some of this? And I know you mentioned the flexibility, mobility, balance, strength, like all that, and the hypertrophy, like those words. Can you go into that for us?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on who you are and what your starting point is. So we'll just do like a case study.
Sure.
And it'll be me. Let me be the
Okay.
case. That works. Okay.
It'll
So
be
I was 37 or 38 when I had my second baby, and I had been working out pretty consistently since, I was probably 33. I mean, I was like a high school athlete, then I went to college, and I was like oh, I'm just going to walk to class. It's far, and all of a sudden not playing any sports, not doing any intramurals, just sometimes going to the gym and plodding away. And then, worked out a little bit here and there in my 20s, did like spin class, went to the different group exercise stuff, which is great for your cardiovascular fitness. But I really do think it's important that we don't allow that to feel like enough, because what's good for your cardiovascular fitness is not always actually paying close attention to building and maintaining muscle mass. So I think there's an important nuance there. So for me, still having consistently worked out, mostly in my 20s here and there, and then consistently like 3 to 4 days a week with a trainer, which I know is not accessible to everyone. I say often that the only reason I work is so I can afford a trainer, because I am a Gretchen Rubin obliger of her. There's like rebel, questioner, obliger, and upholder. My husband is an upholder, and so when he sets a standard for himself, he will reach it just by the force of will, like sheer internal motivation. For me, I need somebody that's like, you're showing up and you're doing this thing. And so that's why I work. And again, I know it's not accessible to everybody, but that was also part of the point of creating Athletic Mom, was like, I need this to be accessible to people on a broad scale. People cannot all go work with a trainer 3 or 4 times a week. It's not realistic financially or time-wise. And sometimes for me, it's not realistic financially or time-wise. So it was this idea of scaling what I was doing with my trainer, who's brilliant, and, being able to distribute it and make it available to other people. So anyway, even having spent a good amount of time a good amount of years working out 3 or 4 times a week, going through my second pregnancy, being about 38 years old on the other side of that, and realizing that I had developed a lot of deficits through the pandemic, as you were talking about, through a pregnancy, and I needed to get really conscientious about building a foundation that was really, really solid. Some of that also started from me falling in love with tennis, but I will say, the original iteration of Athletic Mom was like really encouraging people to also take up a sport, because it's an independent motivator. Like, we love our families and we want to be healthy for our families and friends, but sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes we just want to be better at tennis. We want to kick Cindy's ass, like in the 10 cap tennis league or something like that. And that's great too. But I also found that that wasn't the most realistic thing. So building this foundation and starting with, for me, and I think for most people, is going to be training balance, training mobility, and then layering strength gradually on top of that. Now, when we're talking about something like hypertrophy, we're talking about like breaking down and building back up. And that's great when you're in your like 30s. But one of the things I learned from Dr. Stacy Sims, who wrote the book Roar, she is extraordinary, incredible, amazing, and is really focused on like perimenopausal training and menopausal training, was that hypertrophy is not necessarily the right stimulus once you are perimenopausal, 40s and beyond. You really want to be working muscle building, like higher weight, lower rep type of schemes, and or true high intensity interval training, which is not, I think she said, what was this podcast I was just listening to her? She says, not Orange Theory. It's not going for an hour and working in that particular zone. If you're my age, you want to actually be doing like short bursts of really high intensity to train that particular domain while also working really hard to build muscle. However, you can't do all of that if you're going to tweak a hammy, or if you don't have hip mobility, or if your shoulders aren't moving correctly. And so you've got to do all of those things at the same time. And that's really the way we developed it. And we have within Athletic Mom right now 2 8-week programs, among other things, among mobility, recovery. We have pregnancy flows in there. We also have like nutrition recipes. We really focused on protein-rich recipes. But we have done this progression where we have your first 8-week program, which is really training athleticism, training all of those foundations upon which you can build any type of strength that you need to build, whatever your age is. And then the sort of second phase, this phase 2 8-week program, is more focused on strength. Both of these 8-week programs work within a very limited range of equipment. Everything you need, nothing you don't. So you don't have to join a gym. You don't have to have a big at-home gym or anything like that. You can do it with really minimal stuff. And one like pro tip I will give to folks is how useful resistance bands are. Like mini bands and resistance bands. Holy cow, they can train stabilization, they can train strength, they can do so many things in such a flexible way. So on top of that, we build strength. And then the third 8-week program that we are working on now that will make its way into the app, that people won't have to pay extra for it or anything like that. We're constantly adding to the app, just like any other fitness app is doing. But the third will be more of a gym strength oriented phase, because the truth is we do have to be willing to move in and out of different phasing with regards to equipment, with regards to what we're actually doing. And that's just, again, being pragmatic, where if we want to layer these things, it will require an increasing availability of equipment. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, it does. I like hearing that flow and progression, and it makes sense to me. And mobility was something that I learned also from my wife, because she became a functional range conditioning specialist, mobility specialist. And they call it FRC. Everything in FRC is acronyms, so it's hard to talk about. But when I learned about it, it was so cool, because I felt like it was almost like so mobility is working on basically flexibility plus strength. So you want to have control over all your ranges of motion, and you want to have a good range of motion in all your joints. And mobility, movement, comes from joints. I never thought of that before.
Yeah.
I heard about mobility. I was like, oh yeah, that's where you move from. And so what it basically tries to do is improve the motion and movements and strength and flexibility of all your joints, which is like the root cause of movement, right? So to me, it was like the movement equivalent to being an NTP, right? Because we're looking at like all the foundations of health. This is the foundations of movement. And I thought that was a really cool component. And then yesterday, my trainer, who is an FRC person and lots of other stuff, he was saying, oh, you should listen to this podcast. It was about FRC and how basically you need to treat the system and not symptoms. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the same as nutritional therapy. Like, we're trying to treat the system. We have to look at all these systems as a whole, and like, what is your stomach doing? Does your pancreas need support? Like, what's going on in this system?
Yes.
And it's not chasing symptoms, but it's allowing the symptoms to show what systems need help. And I felt like it was the same concept with movement. And I thought it was so, so cool.
That's you just made me think of something, and I never made this connection. But when we are talking about mobility and pain, with the nutritional therapy practitioners, we look north to south, like digestion north to south. With mobility and pain and athleticism, like if your knees are bothering you, we look at your ankles. If your hips are, like there are multiple ways to look at what's affecting something else, downstream and upstream effects. So you just made me think of that, and that's good. That's really good.
Yeah, it's really cool. So where can you tell us any more about like why these different things are important? So I talked a little bit about mobility, muscle mass. Can you go into any more detail about that and why it's important in terms of training? Like, why don't you just go to the gym and try to do it yourself, even though you did explain something?
Because I know you weren't asking me specifically, but the reason I don't go to the gym and do it myself is because I did that for many, many years, and I floundered. I really did. I didn't have, one of the things I really love to do is call in an expert. And that's part of the reason I have my podcast in the first place, because like I can't be an expert in everything, but if I can find the experts and get them to talk to me and put together their accumulated wisdom and make that available to people, that's what I want to do. So when we're talking about mobility, I shouldn't use this example anymore, because one day he's going to listen to one of my podcasts and he's going to be very offended and sad. But my dad has showed sort of the hallmarks of aging as far as mobility and flexibility and just range of motion, right? And I know it's not sexy to think of things this way, and I probably shouldn't have used this word sexy in the same sense as talking about my dad, but I'll get there.
It's okay. We got it.
It's not exciting to think about our longevity of fitness, which fitness can mean a lot of different things, but just stick with me, to think about it in terms of what things are going to look like when we're 70. Now, here's the thing about my dad. He plays pickleball. So if we want to talk about like athletic things, like he feels really great about playing pickleball, and it is an athletic
endeavor,
relatively athletic activity. And I'm so happy that he's doing it. But I also look at his limitations in mobility and flexibility that are going to make him more prone to injury should he incur when doing pickleball. So he steps back and he can't, catch himself and he falls and he breaks his wrist or something like that. And I don't want to put that into the universe. But he is a very good example of why we train all the things together. So you might want to run out and do an athletic pursuit, but if you're going to get better at it, and to his credit, he understands this. So he's been lifting weights, he's been trying to do mobility within a certain range. But one of the things that makes me think about is that the opposite of mobility is calcification. I mean, not technically, this is in my mind. The opposite of mobility is calcification, not being able to move, feeling frozen, right? Feeling like you can't move your joints. You can't reach into the back of your car to, figure out what's going on with your kid right behind you. I mean, this is a shoulder car. I'm sure you've done controlled articular rotations, but right in the back there, it's reaching in the back seat of your car and then coming back forward. All of these things are so important, not just in injury prevention, but just in longevity of your training life. And you want, like you said, to be able to do that as functionally as you can over time. So I forgot the original question.
Just why is it, better than going to the gym? Like putting it all together, like the importance of these pieces.
I just don't know any other program. And, I didn't come on here to sell my program. I was looking for something that did all of the things because I did the thing where I went to the gym and I tried to figure it out for myself. And you can download like a bodybuilding program, which are great because they are great for building muscle. You can download a bodybuilding program, and then you can download like a separate mobility program, and then you could go to yoga for your flexibility, and it just starts to be a lot to be able to hit all of those things in sequence and in the proper sequence. And I've been there and I've done that, and it gets to be a little bit too much. And I think this was something that we saw in CrossFit. I was actually a CrossFit certified trainer for like a very short period of time. But what we saw in CrossFit was something really cool, but also something that sort of increased the difficulty of uptake for people, which was that you were doing CrossFit, you were lifting weights, you were doing dynamic movement, you were doing high intensity interval training. You were also doing, after a while, they incorporated a lot more of the powerlifting type of stuff. And then they started talking about like mobility WOD and how important mobility was. And then they started talking about how important recovery was. And I found myself really excited about all of the concepts. Like conceptually, I was like, I'm starting to put the pieces together. Strength, intensity, dynamic efforts, recovery, mobility, flexibility, agility, balance. But like, I can't spend 5 hours at the gym 3 times a week. It was always come a little early and do your mobility and stay a little bit late and do your foam rolling. You have to be able to put these things together in one package. Otherwise, it's like paralysis by analysis. It becomes too much and you drop off because we all have way too much to do, right? Yeah. So that would be my answer, I think.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I totally relate to that. And I think that so many people, like circling back to when you said, I don't want to waste time. I feel like that's my biggest limiting belief. Like, I don't have enough time. I hear it come out of my mouth. I'm like, I don't want to be that person. And then I don't feel like I utilize my time right. So I feel like I'm wasting my time all the time. I have a difficult relationship with time that I am working on. But I relate to you saying, like, I don't want to waste time. Like, I think that a lot of us can relate to the fact that, movement falls off because we feel busy. And I know for myself, the more stressed I get, arguably the more I need movement, right? Because I need to get out of that. Like, it can help you get out of that nervous system state or help you utilize some of that energy that's coming out, that's being released, right? Yes. But what I find happens to me is that I go into a freeze state. And so I am stuck at my computer, literally can't move. I do the least amount of movement ever, and that's when I need it the most. And it's like, one might look and be like, oh, that's self-sabotage. I feel like it's this like nervous system dysregulation that I'm starting to become aware of. So I didn't know if you kind of had anything to speak to about that or anything to relate to.
Something to say about you are so good with the prompts. Like, I just really like talking to you because whenever I think we have a good back and forth, and it's so interesting when you're under like physiological or psychological stress. Really, it's like you're stressed, cortisol goes up, recruits like glucose back out, blood sugar goes up, and what are you going to do with that blood sugar? Like, movement is what's going to pull that out of circulation. It's going to, it's so beneficial. But that's when like our psychology is just like, you're frozen. It's that fight, flight, or freeze. And people choose different, fight, flight, but I freeze, or fawn, freeze or fawn, it doesn't matter. But I freeze as well. And that's very interesting. But this is a little bit peripheral to that. And I have to sort of do a mea culpa here because there have been many times that I have said, if you're stressed out, don't add a workout on top of that. Mm-hmm. But I'm starting to learn that actually in the right doses, a good vigorous workout during times of stress can actually be really powerful in snapping you back into a good place. And that's actually been studied. I think it was Rhonda Patrick that first made me aware of this study, I think, that suggested that this is a different stressor, but a really vigorous workout in the morning can mitigate the negative effects of sleep deprivation. So I would have said, if you didn't get a lot of sleep, then don't go work out. But actually, that the situation is reversed. And I thought that was really interesting. And that's the nuance that you're always talking about, right? Like, chronic, not so good.
Yeah, wow. I'm surprised to hear that about the sleep. But my trainer was the one who, when I was saying, like, I would come in, I'm like, oh, I'm in the middle of a lunch, like, I'm stressed. And he's like, all right, you need to do some zone 2 cardio. I'm like, why? And he's like, oh, it's really good for you right now. Like, it's good for the stress system. And I'm like, wow, I always thought, like, don't overdo it, like, go for a walk instead. So zone 2 cardio it's some calculation that you have to do based on your heart rate. So I can't tell you what the zone is for you, but it's not super strenuous. It's like basically akin to walking on an incline on a treadmill. So that's like a really sort of easy way to get close to that, where it's like, okay, I could do something like that. It's a little bit of push. It's a little more than like a regular walk. But I did find it to be really helpful. And so it is making me rethink what, I think we see a lot of people who are, doing fasted CrossFit 5 times a week, and then they're stressed, and it's like, okay, well, don't do that, right? So we're trying to, it's that some people go to extremes, but I think that's really interesting to think about how movement, it makes sense physiologically that especially if you're having this internal stressor, you're getting all these stress hormones, they're raising your blood sugar. It's like, oh, it's liberating energy, so you go run away or you fight something. So go to a boxing class, go for a power walk. Like, that makes sense sort of physiologically.
Yeah.
And I have seen, I wish I could remember them better, but I did save this, but it was like these little movement prompts for when you're stuck in a certain nervous system state. So like fighting, you want to like clench and like, something like that. So I think that would be interesting too, to maybe see if it could help sort of get you out of that state. So if there's a freeze state, I think you're supposed to like hug yourself or something, or like shake or whatever. But I feel like even just going for a walk, it could be like a really good starter to get you out of your head, get things moving, and get your system like engaged and moving forward and utilizing some of that fuel. So yeah, cool concepts.
You just said something I think that's really important. And what it reminded me of is a conversation I had with my 8-year-old the other day where I said, she opened her window and I was like, we can't open the window because if your little sister pushes on the screen, she's going to fall out the window, and like it's a 2nd-story room. So I was like, we can't open the window here. So I shut the window, and she's like, she wanted to open the window because she wanted to talk to her friend across the street. And I shut the window and she goes, fine, I'll never talk to my friends ever again for the rest of my life. And I was like, no, I'm just saying don't open your window, and that's kind of analogous to what we were just saying. It's like, I'm not saying like every time you don't get enough sleep that you go and you beat yourself down in the gym. I'm not saying it's okay to never get enough sleep because you can just work out in the morning. This stuff is like, this is pulsed, this is situation specific, it's nuanced, it's contextual. So like, let's think of all of the different things that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. If you are chronically struggling with lack of sleep, then we got to figure out a way to tackle that. If it's one night you didn't sleep well, you're not feeling great, but you really need to be on your game that day, go do a nice workout that morning and mitigate some of those effects. We're not saying like do that every day for the rest of your life, don't sleep and then work out.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that what you're saying, it reminds me of a post that I saw from our mutual friend, Michelle Shapiro. Mm-hmm. She said, bodily autonomy, experimentation, and knowledge are the base for healing. So
I love her.
I know, I love her too. But I just interviewed her the other day, but it would be fun to chat with all three of us together. I don't think we'd ever stop talking. It would. But I think that's so true. So that autonomy, so you have this agency, you're not being controlled by, the food companies and the sugar dragons and all that. The experimentation is so huge. So what does it feel like in my body if I am tired and I do go to the gym? It's like, oh, I do feel better. Or it was like, oh, that wasn't maybe what I needed, right? Usually it might be like, maybe the type of workout really depends here. And then that the knowledge, right? So learning these tidbits of things like, oh, that's a good idea. I'll save that in my toolbox and I'll experiment with it when the time comes. I think that we keep coming back to that nuance. It's like building this box of tools, getting the experts in there, because I don't know how to, build a deck, right? So I might be able to hang a shelf, but I don't know how to build a deck. So I'd need an expert to help me with that. And so much of this, like, I'm the same as you. I need a trainer. I need that external accountability, but I also realize that I have these limitations and I need to be led through something that's not just like, you can't just leave me in a gym because I'm going to do the stuff that's easiest, maybe not the stuff that I need the most. Like what you hate the most, you need the most sometimes. So it's like, so I love all those concepts, and so great.
We're so smart.
All right, so I want to be respectful of your time, and we are coming up on the hour. So tell us where we can find, we know your book, Eat the Yolks. I'm sure you can find that anywhere books are sold. Yep. Tell us about Athletic Mom, where people can find you, listen to you, and get in touch with you.
Okay, well, we just released the app for Athletic Mom, so we're making it a lot easier to take with you on the go and actually like write down what you're doing. And so you can go to athleticmom.com, and let me put together a discount code for your people. What should it be like?
Just sugar?
Sugar?
Yeah, sugar.
Oh, sugar. I'm going to write this down so I don't forget. Sugar, and we'll do 20% off for, I don't know, we'll do like 4 weeks after the podcast airs, something like that.
Sure.
Okay, if that works. And so you can go to athleticmom.com. You can find the monthly membership or the yearly membership. The yearly membership is a deeper discount. We'll do 20% off either one. And you can find me at Real Food Liz on Instagram. I'm probably the most active there, but I also have a website, realfoodliz.com. And you can find like a little bit more about me and my philosophy and the long form stuff that people aren't like really into these days, but I still really, really like.
Yeah, and the Balanced Bites podcast as well.
Oh, of course. I'm the worst at self-promotion. The Balanced Bites podcast. We did that podcast for like 8 years. Took a couple of years off while, the world was a little crazy and I was pregnant and we were just kind of processing a lot of things. But the Balanced Bites podcast is back. And I think we're on episode like 416 now. So there's a ton there for folks who want to like dig back, or you can just listen to the newer stuff. My episode with Danielle is pretty recent. Some episodes with Michelle Shapiro. We've had some really, really cool people come on the show. So if you're more of a auditory learner, then that would be a good spot for you. And by the way, I also did read my own audiobook for Eat the Yolks. So if you prefer audiobooks and you like what you've heard today, I use my audiobook voice for that, and you can get the audiobook as well.
Awesome. The Balanced Bites podcast, I told this, I don't know if I told this story on your podcast. I told it to you in Instagram DMs when I was like crying that you asked me to be on it. But that was the podcast that was like basically the start of everything for me. And even the intro to this podcast, I sort of modeled off that because that was like the OG podcast for me. First podcast I ever listened to. And I heard about the Nutritional Therapy Association where I went from Liz, who is an NTP. And I was like, I think I can do that. Like, I think I want to be like talking with these girls and hanging out with them and having this conversation with them. So it's just so cool to have it come full circle and have you on my podcast. So thank you so much for being here today and for chatting with me.
Absolutely. It's such an honor. And thank you so much for that. I carry that with me. That's really, really meaningful to me, Danny. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.